Hello and welcome back to the American Experience. Today we are going to be discussing a topic that many of you guys who are listening to the program probably don't know much about. But you've probably heard about it because if you're like me, you're probably a right-wing leaning person, or maybe you're strongly right-wing, maybe you're a far-right extremist, I don't know. And you've probably come in contact with the prepping community somewhat. And when you've come into contact with the prepping community, you've probably come in contact with a thing known as ham radio. And today's podcast is going to be the beginning of a radio series I'm going to be having. With it, I'm going to be posting reviews of radios that I like, that I think people who are interested in emergency preparedness and emergency communications should use. I'm going to explain how radio concepts work, and I hope you all have a great journey. So before we get into this, let me remind you to click that like and subscribe button, ring that notification bell, and type a comment in the comments below if you have any questions you have in the comments section below. All right, let's get into this. So what we're going to explain today is basically why is this important? 2, who am I? Who am I to tell you about this info? 3, what do I do? What do I have to get? What do I have to learn? And 5, how? And then I guess 6, the future. The future. I know, the future. So we're going to explain why. Why is this important? Now, I know the intro I just gave and the title we're going to have for this episode is going to be somewhere titled something along the lines of like emergency preparedness emergency communications. And like I said, I'm a right-wing guy. I think a lot of my listeners are right-wing people and naturally we come into contact with the prepping community. In fact, some of us might be preppers. Some of us might be like prepper-esque, you know? Some of us might be like that. And that's cool. I like being that personally. I actually am preparing a bit. Not a ton, but again, I'm preparing with emergency communications, getting guns, all of that. So the reason why I wanted to go over this topic is because I feel like there's a lot of misinformation and disinformation about radio communications. There's a lot of information online that's false, as usual. Online normally has false info. There's a lot of information online that can confuse people, and there's a lot of information online that people just don't understand, that people, they might be told something and then they think it's true and then it's not true and stuff like that. And most of all, I think it's just crucial to give people a basic understanding in emergency communications so that they can better do it. So, who am I? Who am I to tell you? Who am I and why should we have emergency communications? Well, in the event of an emergency, it's important to have food, shelter, ammunition, weapons, guns, water, all of that. It's also important to have communication, either whether it's just with immediate people that you're going to be traveling with, if it's a SHTF scenario where it's like, we gotta go bags and all of that, or whether it's more of a, we just have to stay in place scenario. It's a good way to monitor other groups of people, if they're good or if they're bad. It's also a good way to communicate around the world, if you have, across the country, if you have family members or friends that you want to stay in contact with when the cell network goes down, because it will go down, or if Wi-Fi goes down, or if your internet's blocked, if there's government overreach, if there's martial law declared, blah, 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 and you're scared about that happening. So our discussion today will be centered on emergency communications, particularly in the radio area, because radio emergency communications, or EMCOMM for short, is the best way to do this. So delete everything in your head you've ever heard of satellite phones or those global push-to-talk walkie-talkies. Satellite phones are only good if you have a satellite, and well, if there was going to be an apocalypse scenario, satellites go down, you're out of communication. Now, yeah, you'd probably have like 100 years easy where satellites work, but it's just best to be prepared. And I would recommend having a satellite phone if you want to, just for just in case, and then you're prepared, and then it's just simple. But I'd also recommend having a radio too, so that you can receive information if the satellites still go down, and talk to people even if the birds, as us radio operators call them, go down. And then those push-to-talk walkie-talkies, you'll see ads from Rapid Radios where they're like, this walkie-talkie can talk 5,000 miles. That's a scam. It's not a walkie-talkie. It's a very basic cell phone. And if you actually look back, they say no monthly fees, but you have a yearly fee of like $150 or $100. And of course, it's all based on the cell network. So if the cell network goes down, you're still out of communication. Of course, we all understand why the cell network going down is a problem. It's because right now, cell phones and computers and all of that, anything that's connected to the internet or to Wi-Fi are currently the number one source of communication. We don't actually use radios on a daily basis as much as our ancestors did, or your grandparents or parents did back in the 80s, 50s, 70s, 60s, 90s, etc. And with all that being said, we're going to get into it. And so we're going to talk about why I am credentialed to talk about this. Because I'm not just this random prepper guy or this random right-wing prepper dude on the internet yapping my head off about something I don't understand. Let me be frank about this. There are people out there who talk about stuff and they don't have a ham license, they don't have a GMRS license. Maybe they've used the radio for family radio service, which is basically like those walkie-talkies, but they use a better radio that they're illegally transmitting on the FRS service with, like a Baofeng radio. And I don't have anything against Baofengs. I'm actually having some arriving in the mail soon. I bought one the other day, some UV5R minis. They're great radios. I'll have a URL posted to check them out. It's not an affiliate link at all. It's just me being helpful out there. So we're going to get into why am I credentialed to talk about this again. Again, I'm not a random guy yapping on the internet. I am a licensed amateur radio operator, ham radio operator. That is the reason why I'm doing the show, because I know what I'm talking about. I am a Class 2 licensed ham radio operator, Class 2 licensed amateur radio operator, which means I've taken 2 entire tests on this subject matter. I've been a licensed ham for the past 2 years or so. My dad is also licensed ham, and so are some other. Actually, I don't really have anyone else in my family licensed, but I do have a few friends that are licensed. My karate sensei is actually GMRS user. He's not a ham radio operator, but he uses a somewhat similar service known as GMRS, General Mobile Radio Service. So that's why I'm credentialed for talking about this. Again, I'm a licensed ham radio operator. I've been around radio for around 2 years. I know what I'm talking about. I have talking across the world with ham radio. I have talked around my country, around my state, around my county, around my town with ham radio. I've actually have a news clip of me talking about it. Maybe I'll post a URL to that in the description below. And however, I am not affiliated with RACES, I'm not affiliated with any actual association, so nor am I an ex-military person, so just note what I'm going to say here is purely from a ham radio perspective, purely from a young adult who has operated amateur radios and who is very involved in the community and has a ham club at his educational facility. So, let's get into what. What am I talking about, and what am I talking about, and what do you need for this to be possible? Let's understand. Radio waves are the best form of emergency communications. Sat phones are not. Global push-to-talk walkie-talkies, quote-unquote, are not. They're all junk compared to ham radio. With a ham radio, I can use a radio, a piece of wire, and a microphone, including a battery, and talk around the world. Now, yes, to those hams who are listening, That is an oversimplification of it. However, I believe it is a necessary oversimplification. Now, the fact of the matter is, the radios I'm going to be centering on in the next few episodes on this series are not going to be worldwide talking radios. They're going to be local radios specialized in local communications. What I mean by that is they're going to be in the VHF and UHF range of radio. VHF stands for very high frequency, UHF stands for ultra high frequency. These are radio frequencies that only talk in your local area, maybe 100 miles max, maybe a couple hundred max if you're in a high location. I have talked over 130 miles on VHF, on very high frequency radio frequencies. However, that was because I was also like 100 feet or so above on a hilltop, and the other guy could barely hear me. So, keep this all into perspective. It's not as simple as it sounds. But again, VHF, UHF. Now, how is this beneficial? Well, the VHF, UHF range of the radio spectrum is mostly used for local communications, again, up to 100 miles or so max. There's a lot of possibility in there. You can talk locally with your friends, or you can use repeaters, other radios on high locations that retransmit your signal so they can go farther. You can use those to talk farther around your county, potentially around your state. There's a repeater system in California known as the PAPA system. My dad is a part of it. It is an awesome system, and I recommend you become a part of it. You look into it if you are interested in it. It's a system of linked repeaters around California, and you can actually do some pretty interesting stuff with it. Now, also with VHF, UHF, you can listen in on some frequencies to other radio users. These include business owners, schools, the police, the fire department, aircraft, the military, etc., etc. FM broadcast is actually in the VHF range, your FM broadcast frequencies, and all of the above. Also, ham radio operators, which are radio operators licensed by the government to use a certain frequencies set aside for their purpose only, in experimentation, just talking to each other, etc., etc. Again, I'm a licensed ham. It's known as amateur radio, also ham radio. Ham's a nickname that we got supposedly from the early 1900s, back when you used to use Morse code to communicate, and how you communicate with Morse code is still known today as your fist. And hams were nicknamed because we weren't experienced telegraph, we weren't experienced Morse code people. We were called ham-fisted and blah blah and stuff like that. And it was a pejorative used against us. Now it's a symbol of pride, and we use it all the time. It's just an easier thing to remember. So again, VHF, UHF are localized frequencies, and there are a couple distinctive radios and radio services that you can use to listen or transmit or transmit and receive on those frequencies. First and foremost, you can listen to those frequencies using radios known as scanners. I do not personally have a scanner, but they're all over the internet. They're pretty easy. I would recommend them. I have scanners. I have radios from brands that carry scanners. They're good. They're probably good scanners. Scanners cannot transmit on VHF, UHF frequencies. However, they can receive, and that's actually pretty beneficial, because when you transmit, you can be caught. There is a way to track down your signal on VHF, UHF using a method known as triangulation. We're not going to get into that today. That's a subject for another video. But you can be tracked down eventually. Notice I said eventually. If you're moving around a lot, it's going to be hard to track you down. But if you're in a stated location, like a permanent fixed location, it's easier to track you. But if you're moving around, not so much. But again, receiving, you cannot be caught. Scanners are cheap-ish. You can buy them for very cheap prices of like $50 or so on internet. There's, I think the number one brand right now is United, which also sells a bunch of CB radios and radar scanners and VHF marine radios. They're awesome. They're an awesome company. I've personally never owned any of their products, but I know people who have, and they think they're great. Union Radios, yeah, they sell like a handheld for $50 that it can get you started, a handheld scanner that can get you started. They also sell other radios with more features that we will get into later on why you might need them. But all you need to know today is that there are radios being sold that can receive VHF, UHF frequencies. There are also other radios and other radio services. So we're going to explain the three top radio services, four top radio services that are available to the everyday citizen. Obviously, you cannot transmit on military frequencies. You cannot transmit on fire department or police frequencies or ambulance frequencies. If you get a UHF radio capable of transmitting on those frequencies, it's legal to do so. Don't do it. But you can transmit using these certain types of radio services. Let's go with the one that's the most basic and the one you'll know the most. FRS, Family Radio Service. Those are those bubble pack. Those are the radios in your bubble pack kits you find all over Walmart. You know, those little walkie-talkies you used to use as kids? That's what FRS is. It has a range. It often uses UHF frequencies. UHF frequencies have a shorter range than VHF frequencies, but UHF frequencies can transmit through steel and brick and stuff better and concrete than VHF frequencies can, but they just can't go as far. But they transmit on UHF frequencies. You can often get and on very low power and with very crappy antennas, and you can often get out around a mile and a half max with those FRS radios. Unless if you're again on top of a hilltop, you might be lucky and get 10 miles then, but on average you'll be up to like 3 miles max if you're like really lucky in your awesome location. The next radio service is MERS, multi-use radio service. FRS is good for family communications. It's good for communications if you're going on a hike and you want to stay in touch with family members. Other than that, it's really not a radio service I'd recommend if you're prepping. Unless, of course, you want to stay in touch with your local community or your apartment flat, then it's a good idea. Then we have MERS, the multi-use radio service. These use VHF frequencies. You can only transmit 2 watts of power. You can switch out your antenna for a better antenna, and they're normally better radios. You can transmit farther, maybe 5-ish, 6-ish miles on a good day, get an average 2 to 3 miles in a decent location. Again, they can't transmit through steel or concrete as well, but they can transmit farther, and so there's benefits there. However, they only have 5 channels that you can use, 5 frequencies. Channels and frequencies are kind of interchangeable to some degree. And I wouldn't really recommend using it for prepping circumstances unless if you're just going to keep in touch with family, community, apartment flat, etc. The next kind is GMRS. This is a step up. This is known as the General Mobile Radio Service. GMRS requires a license from the government. However, all you have to do is just pay the government $35 and you get a call sign and a license. That call sign is useful for all of you and your immediate family members, and even your in-laws and stuff like that. It's pretty awesome. Look up more about it. It's pretty nice. GMRS allows you to use higher power, up to a max of 50 watts of power in a segment of the UHF frequencies. It actually uses the same 22 frequencies as FRS, except it also includes 8 more frequencies for repeater usage, which again is just a radio higher up that retransmits your frequency, which retransmits your radio transmission onto and expands its transmission so that you can talk farther. So, GMRS again requires license. It's a really good one and very popular with preppers. Obviously, 50 watts mobile installations, which are like those trucker radios that you put in your cars and stuff like that. You can get an easy 50 miles max. You can even get 100 miles if you're in Oklahoma or you're in Kansas, a very flat area. On average, with 50 watts, maybe 30 miles, your handhelds are allowed 5 watts of power, and that can get you an easy 3 to 4 or 5 miles daily. It's easy. And with a good antenna, 3 to 4 or 5 miles. Heck, with a repeater, you might be able to get, with a good antenna and 5 watts, you could potentially get 10 miles out or 30 miles out to a repeater. That is possible. Again, it's really good. I don't have it, but I know people who've had it. They think it's awesome. It's a good suggestion. You can buy very cheap GMRS handhelds. Baofeng radios are good. There's other legal radios. We'll understand why Baofengs are technically illegal on the GMRS band, but they are good radios. That's my number 1 recommendation, even though I don't personally have a license. I do know people who do, and that'd be my recommendation just for simplicity and for the fact that that's probably all you'll need, unless you want the maximum amount of radio features you are allowed, which are ham radio privileges. Ham radio privileges are all over. You can talk around the world on HF frequencies, which are lower frequencies than VHF and UHF. We'll get into HF later. But all you need to know for now is ham radio frequencies. Even on the VHF and UHF band, hams are allowed to transmit up to 1,500 watts of power. Yes, you can transmit a couple hundred miles with that. And hams can experiment, get better antennas, they can get better radios, and they can also get their own special radio spectrum that is not limited to channels, but instead limited to a maximum amount of frequencies. It's a very good suggestion to get if you want to be the most prepared. If you want to be the most prepared, get a ham radio. There's some very cheap ones. I just bought some cheap ones. I can't wait to review them. I've seen awesome reviews. They're the UV5R minis. They're great. They're awesome. Again, I'll send you a link. It's not an affiliate link, but I'll send you a URL in the description below. Ham radio allows you to, on VHF, UHF allows you to have your own frequencies privately, allows you to use more power, bigger antennas, allows you to have better radios, and overall, it's a better system, especially if you want to be the most prepared. On VHF, you can use more efficient modes that allow you to communicate sometimes thousands of miles if you're lucky, sometimes on a yearly basis, monthly and stuff. It's a good suggestion, and I personally do recommend it. I'm a licensed ham. It's awesome. However, ham radio, you do have to take a test, and there's 3 license classes. What that means is there's 3 different, basically, classes that licensees, there's 3 different classes of ham radio operators. Class 1 is technician license. Now, if you just want to use VHF and UHF, that's all you'll ever need to have. A technician licensed ham can transmit on all ham radio, VHF, and UHF frequencies, which there are many, and they can do so at the maximum 1,500 watts of power if they wish so. That transmission, if they wish to do so. You have to become a technician class license. You have to pass a 35-question multiple choice test where you can miss only 27 or 28. We have to pass the 70%, which is like 27 to 28, maybe it's 26 questions correct. Fairly easy test. 6-year-olds, 12-year-olds have done it. I've done it. 80-year-olds have done it. Everyone can do it. It's not a hard test at all. All it requires is a tiny bit of studying, and you're good. I personally studied for around 2 months before I got mine, but you can shrink that down to like 2 weeks if you just study hard, and you'll get that license. Again, maximum amount of radio frequency, maximum amount of, you got all radio, ham radio, VHF and UHF radio frequencies. There's also then the general class of licensees, where you get HF privileges, which allow you to talk around the world, and then there's Amateur Extra, which allows you to have all ham radio frequencies, some even lower than HF, and we'll get into that later, but all you need to know is that for VHF, UHF, you just have to get a technician license to transmit on those ham radio, VHF, UHF frequencies. The big 2 bands or sections of the radio spectrum that hams can use on VHF, UHF are the 2-meter band on the VHF frequencies, and the 70 centimeter band on the UHF frequencies. If you've ever looked at Amazon and looked up ham radio, you'll see Baofeng radios pop up, and they will often show 2M-70cm. Those represent 2-meter. It's capable of transmitting on 2 meters and 70 centimeters. Again, good suggestion for a radio. Again, good suggestion for an early radio. I've heard somewhat great reviews. They're Chinese radios, they're cheap, but I have heard, and they have some issues, but for the price, they're good radios. I'm actually getting some in the mail in a couple days. So, that is me basically explaining the different radio services, why you need a VHF, UHF, and all of that in this episode. I'm going to go deeper in the next episodes. I'm going to have reviews of good radios, reviews of Baofengs, reviews of Yaesu radios that I have. Then I'm going to talk about HF, review my HF radio, my Xiegu G90, and etc. I'm going to talk about antenna theory. I'm going to talk about stuff, but with a preparedness mindset, meaning I'm expecting you to only know as much as this episode just stated. Basically, if you're listening to any further episodes, recommend you listen to this episode first, and all of that. This episode was going to be a beginner episode. I think I did a good job on explaining the basics of VHF, UHF for ham radio operators. Again, there's many different things you can, for ham radio operators or for any people interested in emergency communications. All these radio services that I just stated will work without the cell network. They just use, again, pure radio frequencies. Unlike your phones, which use radio frequencies to connect to cell towers. Your phones won't work, by the way, without cell towers. They need those cell towers. So, I hope this episode helped you guys all out. I hope in the future to provide better content, reviews, and all that. Till next time, stay safe, stay free. Till next time, this is the American Experience, broadcasting on the greatest country on God's green earth. Stay safe, stay free, stay prepared. Until next time, have a good one, folks.